So good afternoon. I'm Stephen Durkin, as introduced, CEO of Engineers Australia, and a great pleasure and privilege to be here this afternoon. What I'd like to spend my 12 minutes covering is firstly a little bit of an update or an overview in terms of who Engineers Australia is and why it would matter, what we have to say. And I do this on behalf of a number of the associations that are represented here today to try to sort of really build this picture as to the important role that associations provide. And then I'd like to share with you some of the things that we're talking to government about in terms of the future of Australia. So to paint a bit of a picture, Engineers Australia is a not-for-profit, member-based professional association with 105,000 members, mainly in Australia, but all over the world. Important to stress, we're an individual member-based organisation. In other words, individual members put money in their pocket to be a member of Engineers Australia. In other words, it's not, for example, representing the numbers of companies that might be associated with our organisation and the engineers that work there. So these are 105,000 individual members, albeit including student members. An example of the work and the activity that we carry out that I think is really important just to sort of paint the picture in terms of the role of associations. One example of that work would be the activity that we do with the universities, the 28 universities in Australia that provide engineering courses, where Engineers Australia is the accreditation body or the accreditation authority in terms of accrediting those university programs to make sure that graduates have international mobility, which is, of course, a major theme here today. So this notion of professional standards is really, really important to an organisation like Engineers Australia. Another example of the work that we do on behalf of the federal government is that we accredit or determine the skills of, the qualifications rather, of skilled migrants looking to come and work in Australia. That figure, by the way, for the engineering profession is relatively unchanged, in fact slightly increasing over the last couple of years at about 8,000 engineers a year that are looking to migrate to Australia as part of the skilled migration program. So what I've tried to paint there is a little bit of a picture as to what associations do that is a little bit more than talking to government or lobbying on behalf of their membership or providing direct services and benefits to their members. They're very, very holistic and dispersed in terms of the range of activities they provide. At Engineers Australia, we're on a major program of reform and modernisation. For us, the flagship strategy is to be more externally focused, to be the trusted voice of the engineering profession on behalf of our 105,000 members. And in terms of some of that work, it's really about connecting with, building our media profile, connecting with the marketplace at large. Two examples currently underway. One would be our magazine that we have some copies of. In fact, Kevin Gomez, I can't see Kevin here. Kevin is the editor of this new magazine down the back. Thanks, Kevin. Which is very much all about innovation, and it's about the role of engineering in creating a better future for Australia. This magazine, for instance, is now in Qantas and Virgin lounges all across the country. You can see even there on the front cover, Alan Finkel, Australia's chief scientist, who happens to be an engineer, which we're very proud of, is talking all about sparking innovation, which is an engineer's sort of sense of humour kicking in there. Thank you very much. And we're also doing a lot more policy and media work than ever before. One example of that policy work would be a report that's available on our website, The State of the Engineering Profession, that I would say just about every or most state, federal politicians would have received a copy of and been a part of a conversation. It's through policy work like this that we are presenting many of the facts and anecdotes that have been talked about today. And Australia has the lowest proportion of researchers employed in business anywhere in the world, compared to many, many other similar economies and similar countries. 32% is the figure, compared to, say, Korea at 27%. Australia dropped in OECD rankings in mathematics and literacy from 3rd to 7th from 2003 to 2012. The number of Year 12 maths students numbers are falling. Intermediate maths studied by Year 12 students fell from 1995 at 27% down to 19% in 2012, etc., etc., despite the fact that 75% of the fastest growing occupations require STEM skills. So you can see through some of this work that we're doing in terms of the connection we have with government and the story we're looking to tell about about a different future for Australia, and that's also reflected significantly through our media work, where literally 4 or 5 years ago we would average of the order of a couple of hundred media stories in any given month, and now that figure is consistently above 1,500 in terms of our media coverage. We're trying to get this story out that we're talking about today to the public at large. In terms of those messages that we're taking to government and the public at large, is probably best reflected through our vision statement. The vision statement for Engineers Australia is that we are the trusted voice of the profession, global home for engineering professionals, renowned as leaders in shaping a more sustainable world. And there's 4 really critical elements of this. The first I've already touched on. It's this notion of us being the trusted voice, us being the voice of influence on behalf of 100,000 engineering members in Australia, connecting with government, talking about this different future for our country. And everyone in this room would agree, in fact, despite some of the comments that were made today, government at large would agree that Australia needs to transition from a resource-based to a high-tech, high-value, knowledge-based economy. I would argue with the comment that's been made here today that governments are going to be useless in this agenda. I would put it firmly to the room that governments, the Prime Minister in particular, absolutely has the will to lead this transition, but I do think that government grapples in terms of the skills, in terms of how we actually make that transition. Not to name drop, but I did actually meet with the Prime Minister last Friday, and this is very, very top of mind in terms of his agenda and what he wants to hear from our organisation on behalf of our 100,000 members. So what we argue strongly is that if Australia is to make this transition to a high-tech, high-value economy, it won't be economists, it won't be accountants, it won't be bankers that will lead this transition. It's going to really need to be the vision and the wisdom and the experience of the engineering profession in terms of particularly commercialising a lot of the activities that we're talking about. So we talk often to governments about this notion of the transition of the Australian economy. We also argue very strongly in our conversations with government that you can't build an economy, a modern economy like Australia, on the back of retailing, on the back of tourism, on the back of even the financial services sector that I worked in for many years. You need, at the heart of a great economy, you need agriculture, resources and manufacturing, and that's a very consistent story that we put to government, albeit, as I'm sure we'd all agree here, we need to make sure that innovation and productivity is underpinning those agendas, and that's where I think we can add a lot of value from an industry point of view. And we also speak with a great passion about the future of Australia from an education point of view, in terms of STEM education. A couple of the stats there I've shared with you, but the reality is that 80% of future jobs will come from STEM-based industries, yet we're seeing roughly in the last decade a decline of the order of 20% in terms of students studying those STEM subjects. So clearly we have an issue, and in fact I spent literally all of yesterday afternoon with Alan Finkel on a new platform that's being supported by Commonwealth Bank, Telstra, BHP, in terms of how we can actually face into this very challenge in Australia in a more profound way in terms of improving the level of students coming through in terms of those STEM subjects. The second area that we talk about in terms of our vision statement is this notion of being the global home of the engineering profession. I had the great privilege to attend the Hanover Messe to study some of the Industry 4.0 activities quite recently. I think for me it's really a good example of how Australia needs to really, through the guidance and wisdom of people in the room and associations like ourselves, really try to help Australia think about what role we play in this clearly increasing global trend in terms of Industry 4.0 as an example. For us, as you can see in this slide here, if you think of one example of that globalisation, Australian engineers were front and centre in terms of all of the development that happened in Singapore. For anyone that's been to Marina Bay Sands, you stand on there and you look around the Marina Bay Sands precinct, Australian engineers are front and centre in terms of the reinvigoration of that city. And in terms of the economic prosperity that all of those citizens share. So for us, a big part of this story is the role that Australia plays in terms of being part of a global community. Our commitment at EA is very strong on this. In fact, very proud to say that we now, as of next year, will be chairing the World Federation of Engineering Organisations, which is like the United Nations of engineers. that role will be held by Dr. Marlene Kenga, who's also on the Innovation Council of Australia and a past National President of Engineers Australia. And we secondly, as part of or an example of that global role that we're playing, we're as of next year chairing what's called the Washington Accord. So there's 3 accords that set international standards in terms of engineering education, the Washington Accord being for the 4-year degrees and the post degrees that are held by engineering students, and Professor Elizabeth Taylor, who's on behalf of Engineers Australia, will be chairing the Washington Accord from next year. The third area that we talk about a lot, and with government and with the media, is the role of the engineering profession, not just in terms of doing all this work behind the scenes. The last thing we want to see as an organisation is the role of the engineering teams be commoditised, very much about promoting the idea that engineers are front and centre in terms of this transition in Australia and have a critical role to play in terms of thought leadership. One little known stat that I love sharing with any politicians I talk to is that of Australia's top 100 companies, as measured on the ASX, of Australia's top 100 companies, 35 of the CEOs have either a science or engineering qualification or have a law degree. A lot of politicians are very surprised to hear that. A good example of the role of STEM in terms of making sure that we can, there's a real role in terms of thought leadership of the engineering profession. And the final comment I would make in terms of the vision statement of Engineers Australia is this notion of us as a profession being recognised as shaping a more sustainable future, and really trying to debunk the myth that sits there amongst those that aren't a part of our profession, that often engineers contribute to world decimation by building great big holes in the ground and filling them up with concrete, really promoting this more contemporary picture of the role of the modern engineer being very much about creativity, teamwork, leadership, and in terms of creating a more sustainable future and contributing to our national wellbeing. Thank you for your time, and catch you later.